I'm Julie Zenner along with Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
A new drug diversion program in Superior strives to keep drug abusers out of the legal system and help them kick their addiction.
Great Lakes shipping legend Davis Helberg passed away this week at the age of 77. We'll talk about the huge impact the former Duluth port director had on our region.
And today marks the 100th anniversary of the devastating fires of 1918. We'll take a look back.
These stories and the business news coming up on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. Denny, this week's weather was a lot more like winter than fall.
I think a lot of people for a while to come are going to be talking about all that wind we had and what it did to Lake Superior and the Lake Walk area.
Talking about it and cleaning up.
Absolutely.
More on the weather-related damage a little bit later in the show, but first let's get started with our first guest.
All right, thank you very much, Julie. Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. Well, the Superior Police Department and Lake Superior Community Health Center are embarking on a new drug diversion program in the city. The idea is to help people with addiction issues by deferring criminal charges if they agree to get substance abuse treatment. Here to tell us more about this new program is Nick Alexander, Superior's police chief, and Betsy Byler is the director of outpatient and substance abuse services at Lake Superior Community Health Center. Welcome to both of you. Thank you both for being here tonight. Chief, can you tell us a little bit about the program and how it's going to work?
Sure. So I think as most people know, we have epidemic levels of heroin and methamphetamine use in the Northland. And traditional law enforcement response to the drug problem is enforcement of the laws, and that has to be an aspect of it. And we want to use our resources, smartly, put them towards dealing with the people who are bringing the drugs into the community. But the other half of that equation is the consumer side, the demand side, and that's the users and the addicts. And we arrest people for possession of drugs. We arrest them for thefts and shoplifting and frauds, burglaries, different things that they're doing to fuel a very expensive addiction. They go to jail. They maybe get a fine or some jail time. They get out, and that cycle starts over again and repeats. And it's expensive. There's a cost to our community every time we lodge somebody in jail. But what these people need, the root cause of it is the addiction, and they need help there.
So people will actually then have a choice of a decision to make.
So this program is going to allow our officers on specific crimes, nonviolent, where the root cause is addiction, to give the person the choice on the spot. You can go to jail for the offense that we're having contact with you on, or you can agree to enter a rehabilitation program almost immediately. And if you are successful in that program, which in most cases will be 6 months long, then these charges are never going to be referred to the prosecutor's office.
Betsy, talk about who provides the treatment and what it might look like.
So we always are starting with an assessment that is looking at medical, oral health needs, mental health, substance abuse needs. And we're looking, because we're an integrated program, at all of the things that people could need. And so we'll start there, assess for a level of care that they need, and that's using the American Society of Addiction Medicine criteria to decide whether they need outpatient, more of an intensive outpatient, inpatient, residential, that kind of thing. And so then after we assess it and make recommendations, we'll help people get where they need to be.
How closely do you work with the police department then once this whole thing kicks off?
So we'll have contact, we have contact often anyway. The chief and I have been working on a coalition together for many years, and we have a lot of interaction in different areas. But for this program, it could be daily, depending on if we have participants coming in each day. So we're going to have a lot of contact back and forth about participants coming in, how things are going, questions that are coming up. While we have done a lot of searching to find out all the different details, we know that there are things that are going to come up for us.
Chief, when does the program start?
So the program, started today. So if somebody comes into the police department today and says they need help, because that's an option too. You don't have to commit a
I see,
crime.
really?
We take self-referrals. You come in, you could bring drugs, paraphernalia with you, and if you want to get help, we'll get you entered into this program the same. Since this is a weekend, there'd be an appointment available for them on Monday morning, and we would see that they get to Lake Superior Community Health. We'd either provide them a ride or give them a taxi voucher to get there.
In the meantime, they would not have to spend any time in jail as long as they're signed up.
Correct. This isn't a get out of jail free program either, and I want to
understand.
stress that if they aren't committed to following through with the requirements of the program, then they're going to be removed from it, and then they're going to be held accountable for those original charges. And that's part of the collaboration that has to be ongoing with Betsy, Lake
Sure.
Superior Community Health, and the PD, because we have to monitor their progress. And we understand that people are going to have hiccups in their recovery, but the goal is that they're making steady progress towards abstinence.
What do your officers say about this? They're the ones who are out on the street dealing with the drugs and with the petty crime.
Well, our officers weekly go on calls for overdoses with heroin. We administer Narcan, we save lives. I think they recognize that this is a cycle of putting people in jail, them getting out and happening again. So I know we've been giving training to all of our officers in the past week. Betsy's been participating in that as well, and overwhelmingly they've been very supportive. They think that this is something that's filling a gap that we've needed for a long time.
Is this for first-time offenders only, or can you have had prior arrests?
They can have prior arrests. The most important thing is very violent crimes aren't going to be included,
Right.
and a history with violence in it is probably going to exclude you as well. But if your history is nonviolent, lower level offenses, just because you've had trouble with the law before isn't going to exclude you.
Betsy, as someone who works with folks who struggle with addiction, what's the benefit of this approach that favors treatment over incarceration for drug offenses?
Most of our folks, as they move along in their addiction, have more and more contact with law enforcement. And part of the thing is that there's 3 things that happen when someone is an addict, and the Narcotics Anonymous basic text says that that's jails, institutions, and death. And we know that those are the outcomes if people can't get clean. And this is one of the ways that we can take our people in our community and give them a chance, hopefully to make a turning point in their lives, and also hopefully avoid some of the things that could cause them difficulty in getting housing, if it's a felony or working, because that's really difficult when people are trying to get clean and they have criminal background.
So Betsy, what happens if they fall off the wagon while they're being treated? Do they go back into the penal system then?
Well, it's not going to be necessarily a one and done. Relapse is not necessarily part of everyone's journey, but it is something that happens in recovery.
Sure.
And we're looking at, while we are an abstinence-based program, meaning that I don't believe that addicts and alcoholics can continue using other substances and stay sober, we do recognize that there is a process, and we're looking for progress and not perfection as we move towards this life that they're trying to build. And so there's always going to be a clinical decision made that weighs all the factors to determine when they might need to be removed from the program or being able to stay in it as well.
Now, Chief, this is modeled after programs that have been used in other communities, I understand. What results have been seen in other places where they've tried this kind of an approach?
So a few years ago, somebody pointed me toward a program on the East Coast in Massachusetts, and they've had great success. I believe their stats are showing that over 50% of the people that come into the program are being successful in it and recovering from it, and that's a pretty significant number. And I think against the stigma that a lot of people have about treatment. There's programs, a couple in Wisconsin, one in Madison and Greenfield, that have had success as well. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to help people save lives and I know we might be running short on time, but a big factor too is there's going to be no cost to people to do this. We'll certainly try to take advantage of their insurance or any medical assistance they have, but we received a grant that will offset any out-of-pocket costs. So that removes one of the big barriers for people looking to get help.
You bring up a good point. Can people contribute to help offset these costs? The public?
Well, I don't think we're at that point now.
No.
I think that'd be a wonderful option moving forward.
But
'cause-
it would be permissible if somebody wanted
Yep.
to contribute.
I think moving forward we will have to look at other ways to fund this program when the grant funds run out. So that will be one avenue that we look
Yeah.
at.
And I understand that there is going to be a drug take-back over in Superior. Talk about that.
Right, so we're part of the AODA Community Coalition. The chief and I have been a part of this coalition along with a lot of other community members in Superior. And one of the things we're doing is part of a grant working on opiate use and abuse. And so disposing of medications safely is really important. We don't want them in our lakes, in Lake Superior, in our groundwater, or getting into the hands of people where it doesn't belong. And so we're offering a drug take back. It's going to happen at the Superior Library between 10 and 2. The SPD will be there. And you can bring by pills, over-the-counter medications, prescriptions, liquids, and we're going to be taking those on Friday, October 26th.
And are prescription medications, are they a big part of the opioid problem that you're seeing in Superior?
Well, I think they helped lead to the problem that there was a lot of illegal prescription drugs on the market in the Twin Ports a few years ago, and that created this opiate-fueled addiction that people have. And when that supply started to get curbed, the natural street drug for people to gravitate to was a heroin.
Well, it sounds like you're all set to go, and it all begins today.
It
All the
does.
best. Appreciate it very much. Betsy Byler, Chief Nick Alexander, thank you so very kindly.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you. A legend in the Great Lakes shipping world died this week after a battle with cancer. 77-year-old Davis Helberg passed away peacefully Wednesday in his Esco home. Helberg was the longest-serving executive director of the Duluth Seaway Port Authority, and during his time at the port, he led economic expansions and worked with ship owners to protect the environment. We've invited someone who knows his legacy to share some thoughts. Adele Yorde is the public relations director with the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. And I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. It's been a tough week.
The Port Authority sent out a notice this week describing Davis as a great force of nature and a Great Lakes legend. What made him such a commanding presence on the waterfront?
You know, he had the attributes that I don't know that we'll ever find in another executive. He started as a deckhand at 17 and spent time in a newsroom as well as on a ship. But he also worked at a vessel agency, and he also worked at the pilots organization. So he did all of that and had an experience with public relations before he even started as the executive director. So he brought all of that to bear in the job that he did.
So Adele, what impact did he have on the local maritime industry?
He really brought the Port of Duluth Superior into being a world port.
24 years in the position.
24 years. I don't know that if you looked around the Great Lakes or all of the port authorities in the U.S., that you would find somebody that served for that length of time. But he started things that we're still working on today. So being part of environmental regulations, ballast water treatment programs, that was really a far-reaching ideas that he had way back then. He also took really good care because he knew what longshoremen were. He knew the working hours of the guys on the boats. He really took great care of, and really the long working hours. He really respected everybody that worked along the waterfront.
One of the things that always struck me whenever I had contact with Davis was that he seemed to be such a man of contrasts. He was this big, booming voice and gruff exterior, and yet he also loved language, and he was so poetic. Speak to him just as a communicator.
He was just a quintessential communicator. He loved books. He loved the reading as much as the writing. If he had a shortcoming, it would be brevity was not a strong suit. So he loved eloquent language. He loved the art of writing. He would edit, and this was before computers, so typing and having things printed out and editing, finding some of his writings in our files and all the notes and the margins. He really strove for perfection, set that bar high when it came to really wanting to get that correct message out.
And he always seemed to struggle between wanting to be at the port and wanting to be a newspaper reporter. Do you think he chose the right path?
I think he did choose the right path. He was the editor, of course, when they did the history book of the port. And so I think in that and the work he's done in Esco, his hometown, in the years since retirement, really writing some of those books in the history, he's been able to blend that love of sports with the love of history and been able to really be a master storyteller.
Do you have a Davis Helberg story you could tell?
Some of the best Davis Helberg stories we can't tell on the air, but we've shared a lot of them this week and a lot of laughter. And I think instead of a moment of silence, we were at a meeting today and we all shared Davis stories.
And laughter is wonderful. I mean, if you could laugh with him over what he had done and accomplished and how he lived his life.
He had a wicked wit. Besides being a storyteller, he was a great joke teller. Most of them, again, not repeatable here, but entertaining nonetheless.
I understand you've heard from a lot of his friends and colleagues over the course of the week.
I shouldn't have been amazed, but just emails that have been rolling in talking about what a presence he was in their lives, how much time he spent with them. A lot of people who were newcomers to the maritime industry have said, the 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when they knew nothing about the industry, how much time he really took.
Did he influence the port directors that came after him?
I think he left some pretty big shoes to fill, but he did. He left a legacy of what the maritime world means to this community, and I think that was instilled in all of us who still work there, that this is an incredible port and that it's delivering that message and telling those stories that's so very important.
But he also left a legacy to the bigger community, the wider community. What might that be?
I think somebody said it best today. He was an ordinary man who did extraordinary things, and he never forgot that he was a hometown boy from Esco. He never forgot his roots, and this man headed the American Association of Port Authorities for a while. The Chamber of Marine Commerce, he sat on boards all across the country, and yet he brought that small town wisdom and that grittiness that comes from growing up here in the Northland. He really always kept that at the forefront.
It never left him, did it?
Never left him.
You've talked to a lot of people who knew him well. You knew him well. What do you think he would be most proud of in terms of his influence on the port?
His influence on the port. Before you said on the port, I was going to say he was so proud of his family and his grandchildren and
well, maybe that's more
great.
That is more important.
So I think that was a real source of pride for him. But I think his source of pride was to look around and say that this port could compete with any other port on any of the other three seacoasts. We're the farthest inland seaport, and he really felt that he brought forward that idea that we were connected to the world, and this was an international seacoast. And I think that was the pride. He really made a name for the Port of Duluth Superior. I don't know that he was always worried about making a name for himself, but he really made a name for the Port of Duluth Superior.
And there will be a memorial for him?
There
coming
will
up?
be. It's being termed a sail away. So it will be on Monday, November 12th, and at Pier B Resort, so that we can all be looking at the water.
I got to say, too, Davis was always a wonderful guest on this program when we had him, so
Yes,
he'll be missed.
he will
was-
be.
He was
will be.
delightful. Adele, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Adele.
An engine like this one behind me, the number 14 steam locomotive, which would have been practically brand new in 1918, it had its screen to catch the embers inside the smoke box, where it wasn't always serviced that regularly. And by this time, the steam pressure had gone up from, say, maybe 100 pounds to 150 to 180 pounds. So all of a sudden, you've got much more force expelling those embers out even further. And yes, it was much more likely that a fire would start from a coal-burning engine than from a wood-burning one back in the day.
With very little precipitation over the past weeks and temperatures in the low 70s, railroad officials were concerned about several small fires burning alongside the tracks.
On the 10th of October, prior to the conflagration getting out of control, George Stewart, who was a Great Northern superintendent of the district at the time, issued a general order, which was to all the railroad stations along the line to be on the lookout for fire hazards and to monitor the fires that had already been reported up and down the line.
One of those fires began burning October 10th along the Great Northern route, about 4 miles west of Brookston at milepost 62. Today, there are few signs left of the siding known as O'Brien's Spur near the banks of the St. Louis River. Shortly after a train passed through, local farmers saw smoke and went to investigate. The fire had started in some dry grass along the tracks and spread to cords of lumber stored at the siding.
And there were some of the local farmers and so on that had gone and were trying to fight the fire and were largely unsuccessful.
The humidity just bottomed out, and those little grass fires turned into huge conflagrations.
It was very, very dry that day. Relative humidities were well below 20%. And then on top of that, you had sustained winds that were on the order of 30 to 40 miles an hour with gusts above 50 miles an hour.
In Brookston, there was a woman operator at the station who got the word from Stewart, and she kept monitoring the situation. She kept sending out the messages of where the fire was. As the trains came through, she would get that information and pass it along.
By noon on October 12th, the milepost 62 fire was out of control and burning toward Brookston, home to about 500 people on the banks of the St. Louis River. Farmers in the area fought to save their homesteads, but by mid-afternoon, the flames had reached town, and hundreds climbed aboard a Great Northern freight train to make their escape.
Time now for the business news from the folks at Business North. As we saw in the video earlier in our show, Duluth's key tourism district suffered additional damage Wednesday. It was just 1 year after a similar rain and windstorm left $10 million in wreckage along the Lake Superior shoreline. Ironically, repair work on the 2017 damage had just started this week on a lake walk segment between the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and Fitkers. City officials are evaluating the latest damage, which includes the loss of soil beneath paved walkways and the replacement of lost or broken boardwalk segments.
St. Luke's and the Proctor School District celebrated the opening of the city's Sports and Events Center during a Wednesday ceremony. Through a 10-year, $300,000 agreement announced last June, St. Luke's secured naming rights for the 44,000 square foot facility. It's designed to provide Proctor Public Schools with athletic training and to foster health and wellness in the community. The facility houses an ice rink, a walking track, and a community room for gatherings of up to 100 people. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Our time is up, but if you have a comment, be sure to call, dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdse.org. And visit the WDSE website for the latest programming, news and job openings at the station, and special events in the region. And Denny, I know you won't forget to watch our documentary, The Fires of 1918, coming up tonight at 9 o'clock.
That big fire 100 years ago today. If you're at all interested in history, and you should from this region, that is a program to watch at 9.
All right.
All right.
You did a beautiful job of voicing it.
Well, thank you. Everybody worked really hard on that.
Lots of
one,
people
so,
involved.
yeah.
For Denny and the crew here at WDSE, I'm Julie Zenner. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you next time.